So in what might have been the weirdest race of the season, and really in the past couple of seasons, Esteban Ocon has won the Hungarian Grand Prix, and Sebastian Vettel, who was second, got disqualified. So we're going to talk about all that and much, much more in this video. So the first thing I want to address is, an Alpine winning. Obviously that's not a thing anyone expected coming into this race. But it wasn't just Ocon that did good, because Fernando Alonso, his teammate, was P5 or P4 in the final classification, which we'll talk about in just a minute. And he had a chance at a podium before really having to fend off Lewis Hamilton, which is kind of a lost cause in an Alpine car. So without that and Sainz, he might have had a chance at getting P3. And even an Alpine P1, P4 isn't terrible at all. So really good race for Alpine, and especially Esteban Ocon getting his first ever Formula One win in some interesting circumstances. Now let's talk about Seb Vettel in P2. Now, he officially finished the actual race on track in P2. Now, his car didn't have enough fuel in it for the FIA to get their full 1 liter worth of fuel testing done, apparently. So they only were able to get 0.3 of a liter of fuel out of the car to test. Now, the problem is, due to an old rule, they have to have 1 full liter of fuel to test, or at least they have to get 1 liter of fuel out of the car for the car to be legal and to finish the race and be classified or whatever. Vettel's car, like I said, they were only able to get 0.3 of a liter out of it. Now, I say they were only able to get 0.3 of a liter out because Aston Martin says that there was a total of 1.7 liters of fuel in the car, which is quite interesting. Now, F1 has accurate fuel monitoring systems and all this stuff that they pretty much know almost exactly how much fuel the car has burnt in a race, just for how much fuel they put in the car at the beginning, how much they use during a race, and they can just deduct the total from that because of the FIA's testing systems about how much fuel you're allowed to use in certain amounts of time or whatever. Everything is very specific with that, and they generally know how much fuel they've used. The problem is that they were only able to get 0.3 of a liter out of the car. Now, what Aston Martin has said is that they had a pump issue, which I assume is a fuel pump issue. It just said it was a pump issue of some kind that might be the reason why they were only able to get 0.3 of a liter out of the car for testing. Now that's interesting. It seems like if they had fuel in the car, they would be able to get it out of the tank or whatever if they just, to an extent, disassemble the car as much as they need to get the fuel out. But, I don't know how any of that works. In my opinion, I'm kind of biased because I guess a little bit of a Seb fan, especially since he's moved away from Ferrari or whatever and isn't... he's more of an underdog at this point anyways, especially now that he's getting into the twilight of his career-ish. He only came in 2008, so he's probably still got a while, but still. Seb, in my opinion, shouldn't have been disqualified. First of all, if there actually wasn't a full liter of fuel in the car, that's a team issue. That is all decided by the team. It really sucks that he doesn't get the points for that race. He finished P2, so he should be getting 18 points, which is a giant championship swing, not only for Seb, but for Aston Martin in general. They'd probably pass at least someone in the championship. I don't know the championship standings pulled up, so I'll have to get those in just a minute. But it would be a giant points day for Aston Martin. So it really sucks that they're not going to get that P2 as a train goes by in the background. Anyways, obviously for Seb, that's another... that would have been his second podium for Aston Martin that he's been denied of at this point. Now let's talk about that 1.7 liter number. Now, because of this, Aston Martin has actually said that they intend to appeal the disqualification, saying that they can get more fuel out of the car and they need to basically get access to the car to get the fuel out or whatever, something. I don't exactly know the details of the appeal because it hasn't been announced yet. It's just an intent to appeal. Now, it seems like, based on what Aston has said, that this should be quite likely that they get reinstated and Seb keeps his P2. The only thing is, does the FIA reverse its decision regarding that? Because of, I don't know. The question is, do they want to hold the hard line of we couldn't do XYZ to get the fuel out, so the car's disqualified or whatever? In general, I think it's a stupid rule. Like, in my opinion, just test the fuel before it's going into the car or something. I don't understand why they have to test it after the race and you have to have a certain amount of extra fuel that you just don't use but like sits in the tank, and it's weird. It's quite weird. Now, another thing that was weird about the way the FIA has handled this was they released the final classification from the race and it had Vettel classified in P2, which is also quite weird. And apparently that was standard procedure for if a person gets disqualified and they intend to appeal or something, they'll put them in the position they finished, and then depending on the outcome of the appeal, they'll put them back where, or they'll either keep them where they're supposed to be or just disqualify them and do the standard disqualification procedure. Then they reversed that and released, I guess, a update of the final classification with Vettel disqualified, and both of these classification releases were significantly after it was announced that Vettel was disqualified. It's very weird. They've just made it confusing in general. Whether or not, first of all, whether or not Vettel's disqualified. The official announcement at this point is that he is, but then putting him in the final classification, it's just weird. I don't know. So let's go ahead and actually talk about the race itself, because you might be wondering to yourself how Ocon won and how Vettel was second and what else happened with the podium. We'll get to that in just a minute. So as to what actually happened with the race, a lot of it happened on lap 1. Lap 1, turn 1, actually, because going into turn 1, Valtteri Bottas behind Lando Norris had locked up the brakes and went wide, into just straight into the back of Lando Norris. And Norris ended up kind of pinballing into Verstappen, and Bottas, who had, he had hit Lando. Lando went forward, Bottas went off to the side, and also ended up hitting Perez. Now, the three people that it seems like Bottas should not want to hit for championship reasons are Perez, Verstappen, and Norris, because Perez and Norris are the two people surrounding him in the championship, and Perez and Verstappen, the two Red Bull cars. Obviously, the Mercedes is competing with Red Bull mainly for P1 in the championship. So it seems like those would be the three guys that there's the most impact if you take them out, basically. Especially when you're talking about Verstappen, because Verstappen's also in the middle of a driver's championship battle with Hamilton, obviously. So this cost Verstappen a very good finish, likely, because, if he would have avoided the wreck, he probably would have been like P2 or P3 or something when the safety car came out. It just... The fact that it was Bottas, too. Like, Bottas had started P2, and then he had fallen back quite a bit, and then locked up and took out Norris, Perez, and Verstappen. It's just weird. There's people saying there's some type of Mercedes controversy or something, or conspiracy or whatever, about, like, oh, they're intentionally taking out the Red Bulls. No, I don't think it's that. It's just, it really sucks that it has to go like this, because now Verstappen has been flat out taken out 2 straight races by Mercedes cars. And now Verstappen has gone from a 30-point championship lead to being behind Hamilton in the championship now. And it's just... The fact that it's Mercedes cars doing this is just stupid. It really... leaves a bad taste in people's mouth. And it makes people, it can make you start to think, well, is there a possible conspiracy theory here? In my opinion, obviously, no. I mean, especially just 2 races. Like, if we start seeing the next 2 or 3 races after this, Mercedes taking people out, then, you know, it's different. But that's not going to happen, hopefully. Now, another thing is that Perez has had, apparently because of this crash, the engine has basically stopped working. So that's another engine they'll lose for later on in this year. So basically, at some point later on this year, they are going to get a grid penalty because they have to get another engine. Now, of course, the fact that that's because of their main championship rival also sucks, because Bottas isn't going to lose an engine. I mean, he hit 2 people, but he didn't get engine damage. It was just, like, carbon fiber damage and stuff. So, not only did that happen in the first corner, but also in the first corner, Lance Stroll took out Charles Leclerc. Now, basically, Stroll had locked up quite a bit. He broke late and then locked up and basically went straight on into Charles Leclerc. Now, he had made an attempt to try to avoid people by going off the track or whatever into the grass. The problem is that was right in front of the apex, and he just sailed straight on into Leclerc and took him out. Then that ended up also taking out Ricciardo. So lots of cars involved in the first lap, first corner pileup. Now, in total, the 2 people that were basically responsible for these 2 separate crashes were Bottas and Stroll. They both received 5-place grid penalties for the next race in Spa. To an extent, that's warranted. To an extent, for Bottas, I think that's not big enough of a penalty, especially with the championship implications. But it doesn't. A 5-place grid penalty seems. It's okay, because I think in a vacuum it seems harsh. Just like, oh well, I mean, he locked up into a corner and hit a guy. That doesn't seem like a 5-place grid penalty, but also the effect of it seems like it should be more. Again, it's similar to the Hamilton crash. It was a driver error. It wasn't in any way obvious, like, malicious intent or anything. It wasn't intentionally taking people out. It was just more of a, well, that happened, like, racing incident type thing. For Stroll, I guess, I think 5 places is completely warranted, because, I mean, he took out multiple drivers. But yeah, anyways, that's all of what happened in the first corner. Only took me like 5 minutes to explain that. So after that, basically the entire order was jumbled up because of people having to, like, duck and dive to avoid cars spinning and people getting hit after that, and some people who went through on the inside gained a bunch of time versus people who had to try to go around it on the outside and try to avoid spinning cars and all that stuff. And Esteban Ocon ended up in P2, and the rest of the order behind him was also quite jumbled up. Hamilton was in P1, obviously, because he was the pole sitter. He got away first and avoided all the first corner incidents and stuff. But then Ocon P2, and then the rest of the order behind him was jumbled up. You had people like Latifi, who were near the front, somehow. Just, the entire order was crazy. They ended up having to bring out a red flag because, I mean, there's debris everywhere and multiple cars stopped and whatever. They had to get all that stuff cleaned up. And once they went back to restart the race, everyone had gone out expecting that intermediate tires would be what they would be wanting to go out on, because they'd be fastest, because the track was still quite damp. But then on the outlap, basically everyone decided that they weren't going to go out on intermediates. They were going to pit and put on slick tires. Most people were putting on mediums. Everyone except for Lewis Hamilton. So you have this little snapshot of the grid for the restart, the red flag restart or whatever, with everyone but Lewis in the pits. Lewis was the only guy out on track, so he's the only person to take the green flag and line up for the 5 red lights and go. So is a weird little snapshot here, but in the pit lane, there was quite a lot of chaos. Nikita Mazepin actually got taken out by Kimi Räikkönen, which you'd think if Mazepin got in some type of incident, it would be Mazepin's fault, but it was flat out Räikkönen's fault. He basically just drove straight into him, exiting the pits, and he got being Räikkönen, got a 10-second penalty for that. Mazepin ended up retiring from the race, which brought them down to 14 people running in quite a mixed-up order, especially after the next lap where Hamilton did end up coming in and pitting for mediums. So here's the order after that. So after everyone exited the pits, the order was Ocon, Vettel, Latifi, Tsunoda, Sainz, Alonso, George Russell, Kimi Räikkönen, Daniel Ricciardo, Schumacher, Verstappen, Gasly, Giovinazzi, Hamilton. So, main thing about that, you had Hamilton at the back. Now, Verstappen at the back, he had quite a bit of damage. As a matter of fact, he had lost basically the entire right side barge board. So basically Verstappen was driving with a significant lack of downforce throughout the entire race. But Hamilton being in the back meant that at least Lewis was going to have to fight through the field for basically the entire race to try to catch up. Now looking at the front, Nicholas Latifi in third. Yeah, a Williams in podium positions in 2021. Yeah, for a while it was insane there. George in 7th. Now, he had actually came out of the pits in 2nd, or 1st, I guess, after Hamilton would have pitted, if Hamilton would have pitted. But the reason for that was because he had overtaken in the pit lane when everyone was supposed to stop at the end of the pit lane. George had kind of basically, due to the position of his pit box, had kind of gotten stuck and had to just drive past everyone, and F1 basically told him to give the positions back, and he fell back to 7th. But yeah, especially with Esteban Ocon in the lead and Sebastian Vettel in 2nd. That was completely insane, at least for those first couple of laps. First of all, while you had faster cars trying to overtake slower cars, you had Hamilton behind Schumacher and a lot of the other back markers back there, Giovinazzi, all those back marker cars that Hamilton had to spend the next 10 or 15 laps just trying to get by. And as the race went on, Hamilton eventually got past everyone and all the way up to 3rd place at the end of the race. Now, he had quite a battle with Fernando Alonso for what would have been P4 on track. Everything I'm saying for positions is on track. This is not counting the Vettel disqualification or whatever. But on track, Hamilton was fighting Alonso for P4. Now, the main reason that Fernando would have been holding up Hamilton so profusely, basically, was because of his teammate Ocon in P1 or P2 if he got passed by Vettel or something, just podium positions. Basically, even though there was no hope of Alonso holding up Hamilton really for the rest of the race, the goal was to try to hold up Hamilton for as long as possible to make sure that Hamilton wouldn't catch Vettel and Ocon up front. Now, at the end of the race, Hamilton had eventually gotten past Alonso and Sainz in front of him and was catching both Vettel and Ocon quite quickly. By the end of the race, it was only about a 2-second gap between Hamilton and Vettel was only about a second and a half behind Ocon. So, given another lap or two at the pace Hamilton was catching them, Hamilton probably would have been able to win the race. So, really good job by Fernando Alonso, who ended up getting driver of the day, quite deservedly, in my opinion. So, yeah, that's really about all that happened in the race. Let's go ahead and talk about the results. So, obviously, Esteban Ocon has won the race. The main thing to talk about this is this puts Ocon in the top 10 for the championship. Somehow he wasn't already in the top 10. He was outside the top 10 before this race. This finish puts him in 10th, pending decision on the Vettel disqualification. If Vettel's P2 is reinstated, that would actually put Ocon back out of the top 10 in points. Points are weird. The fact that someone who's won a race would be 10th or 11th or whatever in points is weird, but I mean, that's how it works. It makes sense, but I don't know. It's interesting how that stuff works out. P2. I'm going to go on and talk about Vettel here as a placeholder because I think Aston Martin actually has quite a good argument if what they've said is true. So Vettel P2 it's obviously great for Vettel. This is his second podium of the year following Baku. Honestly, it was a great race for Seb. Obviously, I mean, he was one of the people who got lucky with, first turn stuff or whatever, but he drove a great race and was really competing with Ocon for most of the race. Yeah, I think it was a really good result for Seb. Hamilton P3. With falling back down to P14 at the start of the race, it was a good recovery drive for Lewis. P4, or P3 possibly, is Carlos Sainz, which if the P3 ends up standing and Vettel ends up, being disqualified, I guess, that would mean that Carlos Sainz has 4 career podiums, 2 of which have been due to someone getting disqualified or penalized or something after the race. Of course, the other one would have been in Brazil in 2019. Yeah, so that's weird for Sainz. And, I mean, the other podiums were, he had the podium at Monza that was, him competing for a win against Pierre Gasly. So it seems like when there's these weird races where weird, drivers end up winning or whatever, that, we just flat out wouldn't have expected at all, it seems like Perez ends up on the podium quite a bit. So, on to P5 or 4 or whatever. I'm going to say position on track because, I don't know, that's just, yeah, I don't know. I'm going to say position on track. Just, that's what I'm saying. So, P5, Fernando Alonso. Great drive for him, defending Hamilton for quite a few laps and really helping his teammate win. Obviously, quite a deserved driver of the day for him, in my opinion. P6. Up next in P6, which is quite a common position for this driver, is Pierre Gasly. It was an okay day for Pierre, especially in an AlphaTauri car. P6 is good, though it definitely could have been better. Had the cards fallen a little different. Maybe he could have ended up a little higher up in the order, maybe competing up at the front if the pit stop stuff had worked out differently. Behind him, his teammate, Yuki Tsunoda, in P7. That's quite a good day for Tsunoda, especially considering his previous results. Obviously, Gasly has done quite a bit of the point scoring for AlphaTauri this year, but having Tsunoda in there obviously is great. And P7, good result for Yuki. P8, Nicholas Latifi in his first time in Formula One scoring points. It's P8, and then obviously possibly P7. Great for Latifi. I think it's cool to see Latifi scoring points. I didn't exactly expect that, but yeah. And P9 is George Russell. His first time scoring points in a Williams. And again, he's overshadowed by his teammate. So, George has had a bit of a weird thing. Because the times he's scored points, or his teammates have scored points, was, well, at least in a Williams, was Robert Kubica at Germany in 2019, who scored 1 point in a crazy race where tons of people got, had to, DNF or whatever, and George ended up being 11th. George was considerably better than Kubica that year, and Kubica ended up being the person that got 1 point in the race. And in this year, George has, Depending on the results, he's going to be 2 points behind actually, I don't think depending on the results. Either way, he's going to be 2 points behind Latifi, which obviously sucks. Hopefully, at some point later on in the year, either we have another race like this, or Williams has, you know, some good luck with tracks and stuff, and they can end up getting back in the points again with George. And because I think George definitely deserves to be ahead of Latifi in the points right now. Not only has George made Q2 most race weekends, but I mean, he's overall been finishing better than Latifi. If you look at the average finish, George is ahead of Latifi by quite a bit. And he's been in more situations where he should have scored points that he didn't. Imola instantly comes to mind, but there's other races as well, both of the Austria races, stuff like that. Silverstone, where George could have scored points and for some reason or another didn't, and probably deserved at least some of those. But yeah, that's an okay result for George. Behind George was Max Verstappen. Obviously, this is a really bad day for Verstappen because Hamilton got 15 or 18 points, depending on the final result, and Verstappen gets 1 or 2. Obviously, Verstappen would be hoping that the Vettel disqualification gets reversed, because that would be, I mean, it's only a 2-point swing, but it's still better than nothing, especially when you're talking about just moving Hamilton further down the order in terms of points. Really sucks for Verstappen that he got the damage earlier in the race. But he had quite a strong drive for not having half of his barge board on the right side. So P10 or P11, I'll go ahead and talk about Kimi Räikkönen. Now, he'd gotten penalized early in the race, obviously, for taking Mazepin out in the pits. But a good recovery drive by Kimi to end up finishing P11 or P10. But yeah, I think it was a good race for Kimi. Obviously, I mean, scoring points in alphas, I mean, it's an achievement. So yeah, good-ish race for Räikkönen, better than normal. So that's about all we have for the results. Let's go ahead and take a look finally at the championship standings. So looking up at the top, you've got a change for the points lead. Lewis Hamilton is back in the points lead after this race, and I really would hate to be Verstappen right now, because this is now 2 straight races that Verstappen has either been flat out taken out by a Mercedes, or taken out by a Mercedes and got damage and had a significant loss of car performance because of it. And it's been a bad 2 weeks for Verstappen, or a bad last 2 races for Verstappen, considering that none of it was his fault, really. Yeah, it really sucks for Max that he's going to lose the championship lead because of this. Hopefully, just, I mean, in a flat-out, like, fairness aspect, Verstappen gets the points lead back, but I also am kind of biased because bit of a Verstappen fan. Lewis Hamilton obviously has the points lead now because of his, I guess, just his performance throughout the race. He ended up finishing P2, P3. We already get it with the Vettel thing. But yeah, that's change at the top of the points lead. P3, 4, 5 stay the same with Norris, Bottas, and Perez. Overall review of the race is obviously it was a good race. Any race where you have Alpine winning, or Seb on the podium, or even Sainz on the podium, anything like that, it's a great race. It was really exciting to see just everything that happened in this race. This race has had quite a big championship impact. I mean, battle for the midfield, you've got Ferrari now taking the lead in that over McLaren. Battle for, I mean, the top of the championship, you've got championship lead change in both the drivers and constructors championship. And for the, you know, lower, like, bottom field or whatever, you've got Williams taking quite a commanding lead for that level of, you know, point scoring volume or whatever. So yeah, that's about all I have for this video. Thank you guys all so much for watching. I didn't do a This Week's Racing News episode because basically all the news was just IndyCar silly season stuff, which I'm going to make a dedicated video about in the next day or two, so that'll be out then. But yeah, thank you guys all so much for watching. I'll see you all then. Bye.